Okay, in the last lesson, we really talked about some of the strengths and weaknesses of both the North and the South, and we introduced you to some of the leaders of both sides. But today we're really going to start talking a little bit about the battles, okay? And as this title slide says, it's going to be no easy victory, all right? Now, I got to tell you the truth. Both sides believe this is going to be a quick war. Remember I told you that Lincoln has ordered 75,000 troops for 90 days. He thinks, and the North thinks, because of this overwhelming advantage they have in manpower and manufacturing and transportation, this is going to be easy, okay? But it certainly is not going to be, as we'll find out. Okay, first of all, what we really need to talk about is the Union's plan. The Union's plan is called Operation Anaconda, you know, like the snake, okay? And it makes sense. Okay, what they're going to do is they're going to use the U.S. Navy, the Federal Navy, to blockade all the southern ports, you know, choke it off. Remember, they can't manufacture anything, well, very little. So what they really intend to do is receive or import things that they need from Europe, from England, from France, all right? So the Navy is going to blockade their ports so that they can't get ships in or out, all right? Now, the second part is they are going to seize the Confederate capital, which is in Richmond, Virginia. Between Richmond and Washington, D.C., it's about 100 miles. So the capital of both the United States and the capital of the Confederacy is really pretty close together. So the second goal is to capture the capital. And finally, the third is in the west. They're going to seize control of the Mississippi River, and then they're going to cut the Confederacy in half. Okay, they would keep the Confederates from using the river to send supplies and troops, and it's going to cut the Confederacy in half. Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana would be cut off from the rest of the Confederacy. All right, so the three parts again: blockade the ports, capture the capital, and cut the Confederacy in half by capturing the Mississippi River. Okay, so that's the Union plan called Operation Anaconda. Now, the Confederates' plan is much more simple, really. They're going to fight a defensive war, right? They're going to fight this war, and they're going to cause so much bloodshed and so much, expenditure of resources and manpower and money that they're going to do this until the North gets tired of fighting, right? Pretty soon they said, as long as we can keep holding our ground and causing the Union to lose so many men and spend so much money, that they'll finally say this isn't worth it and will let the Confederacy go and give up. And again, they also know that they need natural resources, or not natural resources, but supplies. And since they have very little manufacturing, they're really relying on Europe, especially England, to supply money and things that they need to help fight the war. They really expect Europe to recognize the Confederacy as an independent nation. If they get recognition as an independent nation, they know that they're going to be much better off. And here's what they have. The trump card that they feel that they have is cotton. Remember, Europe needs that cotton for their textile mills. So if they think that if they can't get the cotton, England will get desperate, England will recognize the Confederacy, and England will even break up the blockade with the most powerful navy on earth, the British Royal Navy, and send them money. So their two-part plan, again, is to fight a defensive battle till the North gets tired and wait for recognition by Europe and to send them money and supplies. All right? So that's the two plans. Okay, if you remember, April the 12th, 1861 is going to be the first shots fired, and that's going to be at Fort Sumter. There was no casualties in that first engagement, believe it or not. So let's talk about the first major battle. The first major battle. It's going to occur on July 21st, 1861. Remember, under Operation Anaconda, one of the goals is to capture the capital of Richmond. Okay? Now, here's something I have to tell you real quick, though. A lot of people are confused on. Oftentimes, when you study Civil War history, you're going to hear two different names for the same exact battle. The Union tends to name the battles after the closest creek or river, while the Confederates usually call the battle based on the closest town. All right? So let's talk about the first battle. The first major battle is the Battle of Bull Run. Bull Run Creek. So that's the northern name. The South calls this battle the First Battle of Manassas. Manassas, because that's the closest town. All right? So sometimes when you study Civil War, you're going to hear two different names, depending on if it's from the southern perspective or the northern perspective. So the First Battle of Bull Run is the name that the North gives it. All right? It is, like I said, the first major battle. Lincoln sends troops to attack the Confederate capital, which is at Richmond. All right? And what happens is it's really ironic, and it's really kind of insight into what people think war is about. So the Union Army heads out of Washington, D.C. on their way to Richmond. And they are followed by hundreds and hundreds of Washingtonians, of citizens, almost like they're going to go watch a football game. They're dressed in their finest clothes. They go with their nice carriages. They bring picnic lunches to watch the grand battle. They have no idea the horrors of war. All right? So they head out, and they get about 25 miles from the capital of Washington, D.C., where they run into the Confederate Army. And while at first it looks pretty well for the Union Army, the Union Army is able to kind of push back the Confederates, and it looks like that the war is going to be over, that the Union Army is going to be able to defeat the Confederate forces. And it's going to be quick, just like everybody thought. The Confederates begin to fall back, but then they see a man standing there. And one of the retreating Confederates say, "Look, there's Jackson, standing like a stone wall. Rally around the Virginians." All right? This man is going to be called Stonewall Jackson from there on in. Okay? Stonewall Jackson rallies the men. The Confederates quit running. They turn around and they attack. And they crush the Union Army. And it turns into a unorganized mass retreat. It's not organized at all. It's just chaos. Men are throwing their guns and their equipment down, and they're running as fast as they can to get back to Washington, D.C. But remember, there's hundreds and hundreds of civilians who are clogging up the roads. They're fleeing in terror. It is just an enormous disaster for the Union Army. All right? So Lincoln says, okay, what do I need to do? Lincoln appoints a new commander of the Union Army of the East. His name is General McClellan. All right? McClellan. McClellan turns out to be an excellent organizer. His men absolutely love him. He instills pride. He teaches them to drill. He organizes camps. If that was his only job, was to be an organizer and trainer, he'd have done a great job. But as a field commander, he turns into a disaster because he's way too cautious. He never wants to fight. He always feels he's outmanned. He's always afraid that he's going to be defeated. And he never wants to move the army. And when he does, he moves very, very cautiously. All right? So that's the first Battle of Bull Run. You'll notice I say the first Battle of Bull Run because there's going to be a second Battle of Bull Run, by the way. All right. Okay, let's talk about March of 1862. This is by the way, guys, I got to tell you, there's hundreds and hundreds of battles, hundreds of skirmishes, and obviously we're not going to be able to cover them all. So we're just going to kind of cover, some of the key ones. All right. March 1862 is going to be the first battle of ironclad ships. It's going to be between the Monitor for the north and the Merrimack, also known as the CSS Virginia, in the south. Okay? This is the Battle of Ironclads. This is going to be the battle at Hampton Roads. I know Hampton Roads sounds like it's on land, but it is not. Hampton Roads is just off the coast. Okay? So the Confederates had converted a Union warship, it was called the Merrimack, with iron. Okay, so they put iron plates all over this ship. Okay, and they renamed it the Virginia. Now, Union had also built an ironclad. Now, this one is very remarkable. It's something nobody had ever seen before. The Monitor, and I have a picture I'm going to show you in a minute, looks like a raft. It barely rises above the level of the water. And in the center of it is a round turret, okay, where they have cannons. And now this turret can turn. No longer does it matter which way the ship is pointing, because you can turn those cannons on that turret in any direction you need them to fire. Now, the Merrimack, or the Virginia, still has its cannons mounted kind of on the sides. I think there's a couple on the front and there's two on the rear. So it still has to turn broadside to fire. The Merrimack is still kind of that traditional shape, Well, the Monitor is something nobody had ever seen before. All right? The vessels fought again at a place called Hampton Roads. It's the first battle of ironclad ships. And when those two ships met, it made all other ships in the world's navies obsolete, because now cannonballs are just bouncing off of them. Okay? Neither seriously damaged. Both withdrew, but now we have the advent of ironclad modern warships. Okay? No longer are we going to use wooden war vessels any longer. All right? It ends in a draw. By the way, I should tell you, the Virginia had sunk a couple Union ships the night before, and it had probably wreaked havoc and destroyed a lot of other ships. But that very night, the Monitor actually shows up and kind of stops the Merrimack from causing more damage. Okay, so here's a picture of the Monitor. All right. Now the water line would probably come to about like right there. So it's barely sticking out of the water, which means it's going to be tough to hit with cannons, right? The top here is the turret. Now this is one looking straight down on it. There's the turret. The cannons are in the middle. Here's a big picture of it right here. You'll notice the cannon sticking out. This thing can turn. Notice here, these are cannonballs that have hit. Oh, shoot. I'm going to mess that one up. Hang on. I'm going to... all right, but kind of screwed that one up. But you can see where the cannonballs have hit the turret. It's going to be loud. It's going to be smoky. It's going to be fumes of the diesel. I mean, of the steam. It's just going to or the coal. It's going to be miserable to be in there. And can you imagine being inside that little tin can and a cannonball hits? Boy, the concussion is probably going to blow you down. But you're probably going to live. Here's some other pictures of it. You can notice all the cannonballs that have hit the turret. All right? This is a remarkable machine if you think this is 1862. And it's going to completely change the way warships are going to be built. All right? Here is the Merrimack. All right? The Merrimack, you can tell, is kind of more of a traditional ship. It has sloped armor, so cannonballs are going to hit it, boom, and then bounce off. Boom. Okay, same thing is slanted. You notice here on the bottom is kind of a models of both the Monitor and Merrimack. Here's another artist depiction of the Battle of Hampton Roads. You'll notice that the Monitor is barely sticking out of the water. The only thing you can really see is the cannons. While the Merrimack is, more of a traditional-looking ship with just some iron plating. But I'll get to tell you the truth, though, neither side can really damage the other. So it ends sort of in a draw. Okay, so both of those battles and a lot of the battles are happening in the east. But now let's talk about the battles in the west. Remember, one of the goals of Operation Anaconda is to cut off the Mississippi River. And so they're going to, go through Tennessee, capture the Tennessee River. So on April 6th and 7th of 1862, the commander out west is a guy named Ulysses S. Grant. Grant had been a soldier. He'd graduated from West Point. He had fought in the Mexican War. He gets out of the Army. He's not very successful. The only thing Grant is really good at is warfare. All right? But many people accuse him as being kind of a drunk. He drinks quite often. He smokes cigars continuously. And people don't really think that he's going to be that great. All right? But Grant has one thing going for him. He is not afraid to fight. Right? He knows that war is awful. And the faster we can get it over, the better it'll be. If that means a lot of people die, initially, then so be it. He thinks the worst thing he could do is to drag out this war. So he's going to fight, and he's going to fight a lot. Now, so the Battle of Shiloh, this is in Tennessee. Confederate forces surprise General Grant, and it drives him back all the way to this river, Pittsburgh's Landing, by the way. All right? His commanders, Grant's commanders, tell him, you need to surrender. You need to withdraw. You need to go across the river. Grant says, nope. We'll whip him in the morning. That very night, reinforcements show up. Remember that the Union does have the ability to transport soldiers and men much quicker than the South. And that night, fresh troops arrive, and Grant is able to beat back the Confederates. But my gosh, what bloodshed. Okay, over 23,500 killed, wounded, or missing in this battle. Okay? This is one of the bloodiest battles of the war, but because of Grant's tenacity and because he doesn't listen to his own commanders, the Union has won control of the Tennessee River, which means they're a step closer in cutting off the Mississippi River. All right? So we're seeing some success in the West. We're not seeing success in the East, though. Okay, remember up until this time, I've told you that Lincoln is fighting this war to preserve the Union. It's not about freeing the slaves. But Lincoln's under a lot of pressure from abolitionists to free the slaves, to end slavery. Lincoln says, I really can't do that because, legally, slavery is not banned by the Constitution. It's not. So what should I do? Well, he comes up, now Lincoln's a lawyer too. And so he thinks, hey, what has the South always said slaves are? Slaves are property. Slaves are property, aren't they? Okay? So what happens in a war? Can you take people's property? In other words, if we were fighting an enemy and we find all their tanks, can we take their property, their tanks? Well, of course we could, right? The North argues that slaves are being used to prop up the economy, to even help the Confederate Army by digging roads and all kinds of things. They say that the slaves, in fact, they use the South's own words against them. You say the property, okay? We say the property, and we're going to take your property, okay? So Abraham Lincoln's thinking about issuing an Emancipation Proclamation. But because his army can't win any battles in the East, it would look ridiculous, right? Hey, we're going to free the slaves. Well, in the South would say, well, how about trying to win a battle instead, right? It would be a joke. So Lincoln says, okay, I am going to try to free the slaves. I'm going to emancipate the slaves, but I need to have a victory. All right. Keep that in mind. In the meantime, General Lee of the Confederate Army says, what I need to do is I need to go north and pressure the North. So he thinks that if he can take his army of Northern Virginia north into Maryland, it's going to do two things. Remember, the Union's trying to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond. But what's to say that the Confederates can't capture Washington, D.C.? Oh my gosh, that'd be a disaster. So Lee marches his men up north into Maryland. Okay? Now, you're not going to believe this. Some Union soldiers are kind of stomping around and they find 3 cigars wrapped in paper. So they pick up this and they go, oh my gosh, it's cigars. And they unfold the paper, and of course they smoke the cigars, and then they look at the paper, and guess what it is? Believe it or not, it is General Lee's battle plan. One of the Union Confederate generals had gotten the plan, wrapped it around some cigars, and had left it. Oh my gosh. Now, these Union soldiers rush it to General McClellan. McClellan knows exactly what Lee's plan is. But remember, I told you, McClellan is very, very cautious. Okay? So Lee has now marched into Maryland. I remember I've told you that there's 2 names for battles. Well, the Antietam Creek is right there. There's also the town of Sharpsburg, Maryland. All right? So sometimes you're going to hear this Battle of Sharpsburg. Sometimes it's going to be the Battle of Antietam. Okay. McClellan has now learned of Lee's plans, but he is slow to attack. All right? So at last the 2 sides meet. Both sides suffer great losses. In fact, it's the single bloodiest day of the war. Neither side really wins. It kind of ends in a draw. But because General Lee says, all right, I don't see any more advantage of staying and fighting, he withdraws across the Potomac River back into Virginia. And the North goes, hey, good enough, man. We didn't get beat at least. And so they count this as a kind of a Union victory. Lincoln is furious, though, with McClellan because McClellan doesn't continue to press the attack. He lets Lee escape. But now Lincoln has the ability to announce the Emancipation Proclamation. All right? Now, here's something else you need to know. This Emancipation Proclamation only frees the slaves in the states that have left the Union. Remember, I told you there are 4 states, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware, that have slaves that have not left the Union. So those border state slaves are not going to be free, right? Lincoln knows if he had freed the slaves even in the border states, then those border states would have probably joined the Confederacy. And now, if he had done that, Maryland would have joined the South, and the nation's capital would have been completely surrounded by the Confederate States. So Lincoln cannot free all the slaves, only the slaves that are in the states that have left the Union. All right, so that's the Emancipation Proclamation, followed by the Battle of Antietam, September 17th, 1862. Okay, here's a couple, here's a map showing some of the battles. Obviously, here's the first battle, Bull Run, right there. Here's the Battle of Hampton Roads, the Monitor and the Merrimack. Antietam is right there. So I just want to give you kind of a perspective of where we're talking about. Now, because most of the people live in the East, the big major cities are up there, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and because the North isn't winning many of these battles, it looks like, honestly, the South is doing better. Now, West, obviously, General Grant is doing pretty well, but still people are looking at the battles in the East, and they don't feel very good about what's going on. General Lee is continuously being able to handle the mighty Union Army. All right, so it goes on. General McClellan is actually kind of relieved of his command. In fact, Lincoln says, "Hey, General McClellan, if you're not going to use the army, can I borrow it? Because I'll use it." Right? So they get rid of McClellan and they put in General Burnside. General Burnside is not a very capable commander. He's a good soldier. He's honest. He tries hard, but he cannot match wits with General Lee. That is for sure. All right. So here's what happens. Burnside does follow orders, and he is going to attack Lee. And he is going to go up and try to attack Richmond again. So he attacks south towards Richmond. Well, he has to cross a river, and it's right across the town of Fredericksburg, Virginia. All right? Now, it's December, it's cold, it's rainy, it's snowy, people are miserable, and they come to this river, and they can't get across. So General Burnside says, okay, start building bridges. Now, during this time, as the Union Army is trying to give across the river, General Lee, remember, he is an engineer, master of engineering, master at defense. There's some hills behind the town of Fredericksburg, and he digs in. Okay? The Union Army, and you can see them right down here, trying to build bridges across the river. They're constantly being sniped at. Many of their men are being shot and killed as they're trying to build these bridges. But finally, they are able to get these bridges built, and the Union Army comes across into Fredericksburg, where they loot the town, they burn it to the ground, but there's hardly any Confederates there. The Confederates are all dug in at the top of these hills behind the town. Here's something you should know. Always take the high ground. You're going to be better defended. The Union Army is going to have to come up the hill, which is going to be much more difficult. They're not going to be able to hide behind things. So always take the high ground, and Lee knows that. Burnside decides to attack right up the hills. And wave after wave of Union troops charge, and the Confederates just mow them down. It's one of the Union Army's worst defeats. It's, again, another humiliating defeat for the Army of the Potomac, and Lee wins another great victory. Okay, well, now it's May of 1863. Burnside has been fired, and then they bring in General Joseph Hooker. Fighting Joe. Joe Hooker likes to talk big, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to beat Lee so bad, blah, blah, blah. All right? So Lee is still kind of at Fredericksburg. All right? Now, General Hooker decides that he is going to try to go around and try to flank General Lee, surround him, and destroy him. All right? So General Lee does something that is very controversial, kind of is goes against military strategy. He takes his army and cuts it in half. He leaves some of his men at Fredericksburg, and then he attacks General Hooker at Chancellorsville. Now he even is smaller. First of all, he's outnumbered anyways, and now he's even smaller. But he attacks Chancellorsville. Remember Stonewall Jackson? Well, he is there. Stonewall Jackson makes his forced march all the way around the Union Army and attacks that night, and they just destroy the Union Army. Oh my gosh! So Lee, he's aided by Stonewall Jackson. He outmaneuvers the Union forces. I told you that Jackson is able to go all the way around the Union troops and defeats them in a 3-day battle. Okay. Hooker, in fact, a cannonball is smashed up against a wall that Hooker is standing next to. Hooker then is almost like knocked silly. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to react. He's almost like he's forgotten how to be a general. But Lee hasn't forgotten. Okay. It is a great victory, one of Lee's greatest victories. But it's going to cost him. It's going to cost him dearly because that night, General Jackson goes out to scout the Union Army. He wants to continue to pursue the Union Army and destroy them. Well, that night there's a bunch of Confederate sentries out there, some troops, kind of guarding to make sure that the Union doesn't counterattack. Well, General Jackson and his men and his staff are out riding around looking to see where the Union Army is so they can attack him. The Southern sentries confuse General Jackson and his staff as Union cavalry, and they shoot. And they hit General Jackson in the arm. His arm has to be amputated. It looks like Jackson's going to live, but he gets pneumonia and he dies. All right, dies a couple days later. So a Southern sentry shoots one of General Lee's very, very best men, Stonewall Jackson. And when Lee first hears that Jackson loses an arm, he says, Jackson has lost his left arm, but I have lost my right arm. Okay? And then, unfortunately, Jackson even dies. So now Lee has lost his best field commander, which is probably going to come into play later on. Okay, so there you have it. We've talked a lot about some of the battles, and, things aren't going well for the Union Army, especially in the East. Okay? And that's where we're going to leave it. May of 1863, the Battle of Chancellorsville, Lee's greatest victory.